Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive.
Hey there.
This is where we take a whole stack of sources, really dig in, and pull out the absolute must-know stuff. We want to get you up to speed fast.
Yeah, no fluff, just the key insights, maybe a few surprises along the way.
Exactly. So today we're diving into, well, the gritty, compelling world of 1920s Birmingham.
hmm
Our source material is basically a collection of notes and analysis, and it's all focused on the very first episode of a show you might know, Peaky Blinders.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we're specifically looking at how core media studies concepts actually, come alive.
Concepts like.
Things like media language, representation, media industries, and audiences.
Right.
How they work in a complex TV show like this one.
Right, using that pilot episode as our sort of case study.
Exactly. We'll see how the theory helps us really understand the show's impact, why it hits the way it does.
Absolutely. I mean, if you've ever watched a show and wondered how it makes you feel a certain way or, why it resonates, applying these concepts gives you the tools to figure it out. So we're going to dissect that first episode through this media analysis lens, see what makes it tick.
Sounds good.
So let's set the stage first, talk about the basic context, and then jump right into media language, specifically how the show uses genre.
Okay.
Peaky Blinders, Season 1, Episode 1. It first aired on BBC Two in the UK back in September 2013.
Right, and it was very much a British production, made by companies like Karen Mandeback Productions and Tiger Aspect for the BBC. Stephen Knight is the showrunner, the main creative force.
And then it moved channels.
Yeah, it later moved to BBC One, which is a bigger deal. And crucially, it became available globally through Netflix. They picked up the international rights in 2014.
Ah, okay. So it started as a UK show and then boom, worldwide.
Pretty much.
Now let's talk genre. We often think of genres as just boxes, right? Action, comedy, drama.
Yeah, simple categories.
But in media studies, we look at how genres actually offer specific pleasures for audiences, and producers like them because they offer a familiar framework,
Exactly. Familiarity is key.
Yeah.
But a really good show doesn't just fit a genre, it kind of plays with it. You need those familiar tropes, the things audiences expect.
That's some for it, yeah.
But you also need fresh elements to make it feel new, exciting. And Peaky Blinders does this brilliantly because it's a hybrid.
A hybrid. Okay, what's in the mix then?
Well, it heavily draws on the gangster genre, that's obvious.
Yeah.
But with a twist.
How so?
Instead of just focusing on, say, heists or the mechanics of crime, the absolute central element is the personal lives and that fierce loyalty within a criminal family, the Shelbys.
Like The Sopranos kind of thing.
Exactly. That intense focus on the family dynamics, even amidst all the violence and crime, it instantly brings The Sopranos to mind. That's the emotional core.
Okay, so the family unit is key.
Totally. And the protagonist, Tommy Shelby, he fits that ambitious anti-hero mold you see in gangster stories. But he's different.
How is he different?
He's quiet. Very cunning, strategic. He's just as likely to use his brain as his fists, maybe more so. Remember that first episode he tells Arthur, "That's what I do, I think."
Oh yeah, I remember that line.
His whole plan with the fixed racehorse, that's pure strategic thinking, not just brute force thuggery.
So he's got the brains, and he's a bit of an enigma. What about the person opposing them? The law.
That's Inspector Campbell. He's the lawmaker sent to clean up Birmingham, investigating the gang.
Okay.
But what's fascinating here is how he's framed. In this setup, the investigator is presented as someone who threatens the established criminal order, the Shelby's power.
So the audience is kind of aligned with the criminals against the lawman.
To an extent, yes. He is a clear binary opposition to Tommy from the moment he arrives, and he uses brutal methods himself, which makes him complex, not just a straightforward good guy. It kind of echoes figures like Elliot Ness in The Untouchables, that sort of determined, sometimes ruthless pursuer.
Right, so the lawman is almost as imposing, as morally gray, maybe, as the criminals he's after, and within the Shelby family itself. Other key figures.
Oh, yeah. You've got Aunt Polly. She's the matriarch, a really key power figure in family business.
She holds a lot of sway.
Definitely. And then there's Arthur, Tommy's older brother. He's the more volatile one, more prone to pure violence. He serves as another contrast to the calculating Tommy. These roles, the matriarch, the hothead brother, they're pretty classic gangster tropes.
So the setup feels familiar in some ways, family power being threatened. But you mentioned it's a long-form drama. How does that affect the story in just the first episode?
It allows for incredible narrative complexity right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Episode 1 isn't just about one single thing.
Yeah, a lot happens.
You have the mistaken gun theft that brings Campbell to town. That's the big inciting incident. But you also get mentions of communists, the IRA, rival gangs like the League, and the introduction of Grace. Yeah, is she a potential love interest? Or, as we find out later, is she something else entirely? A secret agent. Long-form TV lets you plant all these seeds, introduce multiple threads that will develop over the whole season.
Okay, that makes sense. That covers the gangster side and the narrative complexity. What about the historical drama elements you mentioned?
Right, that's the other big piece. That's where the lavish production design really comes in. It meticulously recreates Birmingham in 1919, right after World War I.
You really feel the time and place.
Absolutely. The show grounds itself in the social and political reality of that time, the huge impact of the war on returning soldiers like Tommy, the gritty industrial environment, the social unrest. It's all baked in.
And didn't Stephen Knight mention another specific genre influence? Something unexpected?
He did, yeah, Westerns. He said he wanted to sort of mythologize the working class people of Britain, just like Americans mythologized cowboys in Westerns,
Mythologize them.
by giving their stories an epic, almost legendary quality. He even said season 1 was specifically structured around certain Western conventions.
You can really see that in the opening sequence, can't you? Tommy on that black horse, riding through the streets.
Totally.
The way people react, they hide, but they watch him. It feels straight out of a Western showdown.
Absolutely. That whole ride through Small Heath uses classic Western iconography. It instantly establishes Tommy's presence, his reputation, the whole environment, without much dialogue.
And there are other echoes, too. Other films or stories.
Yeah, the intertextual references keep coming. The whole crime family saga, the power struggles with rivals, and the law. It definitely evokes The Godfather.
A classic.
And that blend of ruthless enforcers, a kind of mob boss dynamic, plus the 1920s setting, it really makes you think of The Untouchables as well.
So it's layering all these iconic narratives together. And you mentioned Knight had a specific personal motivation for telling this story, something about Birmingham itself.
Yes, he talked about a cultural cringe in the Midlands. A feeling that the area's history and stories were underrepresented, maybe even looked down upon, in mainstream media.
Interesting.
He wanted to tell a secret history of England, focusing on working-class lives, presenting a view that's, well, quite different from, say, Downton Abbey, which focuses on the upper class.
The anti-Downton Abbey, I think I read that somewhere.
Exactly. He wanted to use that same kind of spectacular historical production design, the amazing costumes, the detailed sets, the atmosphere, but apply it to a grittier working-class story. It was about giving visibility, maybe even a sense of pride, to a history that's often ignored.
Wow, that's a fascinating goal, using the tools of big historical drama to tell a totally different kind of story. That actually brings us perfectly to how the show uses visual and audio media language to build this specific world and feeling.
Yeah, the codes.
Beyond just genre, what are the specific visual and audio codes doing here?
Oh, they're absolutely essential. The show's visual and audio codes are key to creating its unique atmosphere and meaning. Visually, for instance, the costumes are incredibly powerful.
The suits.
The Peaky Blinders signature. Look, those sharp suits, the waistcoats, the shirts, and of course, those flat caps. They're not just period dress, not at all.
What do they signal then?
Well, they signal status within their community, definitely. Their working class identity, but also aspiration. And the caps, famously, are literally used as a weapon. It's a visual declaration of aggressive territorial masculinity.
So the clothes are almost like characters themselves, communicating power and identity. What about the female characters' costumes?
They're just as important. They differentiate the women and hint at their roles and personalities. Ada's clothes suggest rebellion against the family. Polly's outfits signal her authority, her matriarchal status. And Grace's initial costume, that seemingly sweet, innocent barmaid look. That's a deliberate performance. It's a disguise for her true identity as this cunning undercover agent. Costume is telling us so much before a word is even spoken.
It's really layered. What about the overall look of the world? It's like grim, industrial, but also quite stylish, isn't it?
It is. Knight apparently visualized the setting through the eyes of a young boy growing up in that area. He wanted the production design, even though it shows industrial poverty and grime, to feel full of energy, vigor, and excitement, not despair.
Huh. That's an interesting contrast.
Yeah, you see this in the iconography and the specific settings. That opening ride we talked about, it's not just Western. It also establishes the raw energy of the street, even with people being wary of Tommy. It's alive.
And Cillian Murphy's performance as Tommy is so still, almost static compared to the energy around him.
Yes, his understated, almost motionless presence contrasts sharply with the chaos. That stillness partly links him to the silent, controlled Western hero archetype. But knowing his backstory, his severe PTSD from fighting in World War I, adds this profound layer. That stoicism isn't just him being cool or tough, it's presented as the result of immense trauma. It's like a psychological shield he's built.
Wow, yeah. That quiet performance suddenly has so much more weight when you know that backstory's coming. How did the technical aspects, like the camera work, contribute to this feeling?
The technical codes are crucial. Techniques like tracking shots, where the camera follows characters smoothly through the streets or into crowded pubs, pull you into their world.
Makes it feel immersive.
Exactly. And the specific choices of camera angles, the close-ups, the way scenes are edited together, particularly intense moments like Arthur and Tommy talking, or Tommy confronting Freddy, or Tommy and Polly's power plays, all of that builds tension and creates that sense of energy and excitement Knight was aiming for.
So the camera work and editing aren't just passively recording the action.
No, they're actively shaping how we feel about it. They're part of the storytelling.
Okay, moving on to audio then. Dialogue is obviously key, but Tommy famously says very little, doesn't he?
He's a man of deliberate, carefully chosen words. Very economical. This fits his strategic nature, his calculating mind, and maybe, again, ties back to his war experience where silence could be survival.
And Campbell, the inspector.
He's the complete opposite.
Yeah.
His speeches are verbose, almost sermon-like sometimes. They're designed to assert his authority, project power, but they also reveal his own character, hint at his own brutal past and motivations, just expressed through lots of words rather than Tommy's silence.
Interesting contrast. And then there's the music, which is so distinctive and, well, definitely not from 1919.
Absolutely. That's probably one of the show's most talked about features, the deliberate use of anachronistic punk rock and post-punk music tracks by artists like Nick Cave, The White Stripes, Arctic Monkeys, often from decades after the setting.
It's jarring, but it works somehow.
It creates this incredibly effective contrast. Stephen Knight said he wanted to show that people back then had modern emotions, aspirations, and expressions, even if the setting is historical. The modern music is how he bridges that gap, makes it feel immediate.
So the raw energy of the music mirrors the sort of simmering energy and anger of the times and the characters, maybe.
Exactly. Music supervisor Amelia Hartley talked about how those often angry, energetic songs mirror the suppressed emotion bubbling beneath Tommy's calm exterior. And of course, you have Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds providing that instantly recognizable sinister theme song, Red Right Hand. Sets the tone perfectly from the start.
Okay, so the show uses genre, visual, and audio language masterfully to build this intense, specific world. Now, let's look at how it represents that world, specifically thinking about class, local identity, and gender.
Right, representation. This is where the show really connects to broader social and historical themes. Knight's aim to tell a secret history of England is fundamentally about representation, isn't it?
In what way?
By giving visibility to working-class lives and focusing specifically on Birmingham, a city often overlooked in glossy historical dramas.
It does feel like a kind of historical revisionism, maybe, highlighting a darker, less romanticized view of the past compared to some period pieces.
It definitely is. It's an attempt to dig into alternative narratives, histories from below. And while the show doesn't shy away from the dirt and poverty of industrial Birmingham,
No, it's pretty grim sometimes.
it also represents it as a place of, well, community, complex relationships, loyalty, and also opportunities. Opportunities for those ambitious enough, like the Shelbys, to seize them.
And you see that contrast in Arrivals.
Yeah, think about the contrast between Tommy's arrival on horseback in episode 1, He's Known,
Yeah.
watched by the community, part of it even if feared, versus Inspector Campbell's formal arrival by train, representing outside authority imposing itself.
Ah, good point. And Knight linked Birmingham specifically to the idea of ambition and opportunity back then.
Yes, he highlighted that in 1919, Birmingham was this massive industrial engine, the workshop of the world, he called it. The Shelbys' ambitions, their schemes, their desire to rise up, reflect this environment of potential, even amidst the difficult conditions.
And this focus on local identity and history has had a real-world impact, hasn't it?
It really has, which is fascinating. Knight's project of mythologizing this history seems to have genuinely fostered a sense of civic pride in Birmingham. You now have Peaky Blinders tours, themed pubs, even stage shows and dance performances based on the show, all celebrating that local connection.
Wow, it's amazing how a fictional show about gangsters can actually spark something like real civic pride in a place. That's quite something.
It is.
How does a show represent gender within this world?
Well, the male characters fit some familiar gangster archetypes, but they're often given psychological depth. Tommy, as we discussed, is the tough guy, but there are hints of a heart of gold. He seems protective of children, defends his community in his own way.
But the violence is still there.
Oh, absolutely. But crucially, his violence and machismo are explicitly shown as being rooted in his war trauma, his PTSD. That adds a layer of vulnerability, a reason behind the toughness that you don't always see in this kind of archetype. It complicates it.
So their toughness has a source. It's not just presented as inherently cool or something.
Exactly. It's framed by that trauma. And the female characters are consistently portrayed as strong, complex, and defying simple stereotypes for the era.
Like Polly.
Polly is the formidable matriarch, running the business while the men were away at war. She has her own complex backstory, her own power, and, problematic aspects to her character, too. She's not just the mom.
Right, and Ada and Grace.
Ada is the rebellious daughter who defies the family's expectations and chooses her own path with Freddie Thorne. And Grace, as we mentioned, starts as this seemingly sweet, passive outsider, but is quickly revealed to be this incredibly cunning, quite ruthless undercover agent playing a dangerous game.
They definitely don't feel like damsels in distress.
Not at all. Knight has mentioned that he sees these strong female roles as reflecting the increased independence women experienced during and immediately after World War I, when they took on roles traditionally held by men who were fighting.
So these portrayals feel empowered, rooted in that specific historical context. And the source material we looked at brings in some specific theoretical perspectives here, which are really helpful for understanding why these representations matter, right?
Right. If we think about what this does for audiences, David Gauntlet's work on identity theory seems pretty relevant.
How so?
He argues that media texts offer us a whole range of different characters and identities that we can kind of pick and choose from, identify with. He suggests identity isn't fixed, it's fluid.
Okay.
So for someone watching from the Midlands or from a working class background, Gauntlet might say that Peaky Blinders' specific, non-stereotypical representation of that life could feel more authentic. It might offer a stronger text for identification compared to, say, dramas focused solely on the upper classes.
It resonates more on a personal level, potentially.
Potentially, yeah. And then there's Judith Butler's idea of a gender performativity. That's fascinating when you think about those concepts we talked about earlier.
Gender performativity. Remind me.
Butler argues that gender isn't just something we are biologically, but something we actively do or perform through our actions, our clothes, our posture, how we speak.
Ah, okay.
So the Peaky Blinders uniform, those suits, the caps, the swagger, the way they wear them, Butler would see that as a clear, deliberate performance of a certain kind of dominating, territorial masculinity.
They're performing being a blinder.
Exactly. And Grace's initial girlish presentation as a barmaid, that's also a performance, a strategic disguise she adopts. Butler would look at how these characters are constantly performing gender roles and how sometimes those performances are revealed as deliberate or maybe even strained.
So Butler would say they're literally performing masculinity with those caps and suits. That's a really powerful way to look at costumes and behavior. Okay, let's switch gears completely now. Let's think about how this show even got made and reached us in the first place. The media industry side of things.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts. This show is actually a great example of how media industries, especially TV, function today. As we touched on, it started as a co-production involving UK independent companies, Karen Mandeback Productions, and Tiger Aspect.
Yeah.
And it got funding from the Yorkshire Screen Fund.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Peaky Blinders was actually the very first project to receive funding from them. And having someone like Stephen Knight attached with his reputation was obviously a major factor in getting that initial financing, a major draw.
Makes sense. And then its journey to Netflix was a huge moment, wasn't it, for its global profile?
Massive, yeah. Initial distribution in the U.S. was actually through the Weinstein Company.
Right.
But after the whole #MeToo scandal and revelations, the international rights were sold to Netflix. And that instantly exposed the show to a truly colossal global audience, far bigger than BBC Two or even BBC One could reach alone.
And Netflix has really leaned into that strategy since, haven't they, taking local shows global?
You really have. Peaky Blinders is a prime early example of their approach of, as they put it, telling local stories on a global platform.
Like Squid Game or Lupin.
Exactly. Taking something deeply rooted in a specific place and culture like 1919 Birmingham and finding its universal appeal for viewers everywhere. Shows like Squid Game from Korea, Lupin from France, Money Heist from Spain, they're all hyper-local stories that went absolutely global thanks to streaming distribution. Peaky Blinders fits that mold.
What about the economic factors and the role of institutions like the BBC in the UK?
Well, the BBC, being a public service broadcaster, operates differently from purely commercial channels. They have a mandate, a remit, to create fresh, unique content and support UK culture.
Not just chase ratings.
Well, they need audiences, but it's not the only driver. Their remit includes investing in productions set and filmed in underrepresented areas of the UK, like the Midlands focus in Peaky. This public service model can, in theory, allow them to take more creative risks on less conventional ideas compared to broadcasters solely reliant on advertising revenue.
And international co-productions seem pretty essential now for big-budget drama.
They absolutely are. It's how most high-end TV gets made in the global landscape. Netflix has effectively rescued or boosted some BBC shows by co-producing or acquiring the global rights, providing crucial investment.
Like The Last Kingdom.
Yeah, that's another example. And the BBC also partners with other major players like HBO on shows like His Dark Materials. The BBC's strong international reputation for quality drama makes these collaborations attractive for global partners.
And Netflix's scale is just enormous, isn't it?
It's staggering. Over 200 million subscribers worldwide now. Their reach is unparalleled. And their willingness to invest heavily in original content, including non-Anglophone shows, really sets them apart from some rivals who might be more focused on existing franchises or US-centric content. They offer an alternative platform for diverse stories.
Technology, specifically streaming, has also completely changed how we even measure success, hasn't it?
Definitely. Scheduled broadcast viewing figures on channels like BBC One are still important in the UK, of course.
Yeah.
But global online playing time on streaming services like Netflix is now a massive metric.
Right.
The source material points out a really interesting comparison for Peaky Blinders Season 6. It got around 5.4 million viewers on its BBC One broadcast premiere, which is great.
Yeah, solid number.
But on Netflix globally, that same season accumulated over 45 million hours, played in just 1 week.
Wow, 45 million hours. That difference is just huge. It really shows how much the landscape has shifted.
It really highlights the power of digital convergence and on-demand streaming. And that global reach fuels global fan engagement, too. You see people from all over the world doing Peaky Blinders cosplay and sharing it on platforms like TikTok.
This touches on some of the theories about cultural industries, doesn't it? Like David Hesmanhaw's ideas about risk and repetition.
It does, yeah. Hesmanhall talks about how media industries often try to minimize risk by relying on formulas, stars, and reusing existing intellectual property IP, things like sequels, remakes, established genres, which can sometimes lead to less experimental or diverse content.
The safe bets.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But institutions like the BBC, with its public service funding model, and platforms like Netflix with their subscription model, where they need to keep subscribers happy with a constant flow of new stuff, can potentially afford to take more chances on unique, original concepts, like Peaky Blinders, even though ultimately they still need to attract and keep large audiences. The financial model is just different.
So maybe the pressure to make money back immediately from advertisers is different with subscription or public funding, allowing for more unique shows like this to get made.
Potentially, yes.
Yep.
It definitely shifts the risk calculation and the types of success they're looking for.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Moving on then to the final piece of the puzzle, audiences. How does a show like Peaky Blinders, with all these complex elements, actually connect with the millions of people who watch it? What's the appeal?
Well, the show is very effective at offering multiple points of appeal, which helps it attract a broad audience. Its hybrid genre nature, as we discussed, pulls in fans of gangster films, westerns, and historical dramas.
Something for everyone, genre-wise.
Kind of. People interested in history can appreciate the period detail and the social context. Those interested in social and political themes from that era find depth there too.
And the characters themselves appeal to different groups.
Exactly. Viewers who appreciate, classic masculine archetypes find Tommy and the other Blinders compelling. But at the same time, viewers with perhaps more feminist perspectives can really appreciate the strength and complexity of the female characters like Polly, Ada, and Grace, who actively challenge the gender norms of the time.
So it hits different notes for different people. This is where someone like Stuart Hall and his reception theory is really useful, right? The idea that audiences aren't just passive sponges.
Exactly. They actively interpret or decode media texts differently based on their own background, experiences, beliefs.
Right.
Hall argued audiences generally decode texts in one of three main ways. A dominant reading is when someone pretty much accepts the show's intended meaning or preferred reading. So for Peaky, that might be someone who enjoys the cool style, the anti-heroes, the valorization of working class history. They buy into what the show seems to be selling.
Okay, they're on board. What's a negotiated reading?
A negotiated reading is more mixed. Someone might appreciate the show's craft, the acting, the look of it, the strong female characters, but maybe feel uncomfortable with or critical of certain aspects, like the level of stylized violence or perhaps the romanticizing of criminals. They accept some parts, reject others.
Makes sense. And an oppositional reading.
That's someone who fundamentally rejects the show's core message or style. They might find the stylized violence gratuitous and offensive. They might question the historical accuracy of the gang itself. The real Peaky Blinders were active a bit earlier and maybe less organized. Or they might just hate the anachronistic music, finding it distracting or inappropriate.
So they push back against it.
Yeah. The show is complex and layered enough that all these different readings are possible, even likely, among its large audience.
And finally, Henry Jenkins' work on fandom seems absolutely perfect for this show. Peaky Blinders has a huge, incredibly active fan base, doesn't it?
Oh, massively so. Jenkins sees fandom not just as passive consumption, but as a deeply personal, often creative relationship with media texts. And remember Stephen Knight's goal of addressing that cultural cringe and mythologizing the Midlands?
Yeah.
Well, it seems to have directly fueled this amazing cultural renaissance linked to the show in Birmingham and the surrounding area.
You mean the tours and pubs?
Exactly. I've seen photos, too.
Yeah.
Fans flock to the Midlands for guided tours of filming locations. There are themed pubs. There was even a big Peaky Blinders festival where loads of attendees, apparently including the mayor of Birmingham, dressed up in the costumes.
That's incredible.
Jenkins would call this kind of activity a sort of cottage industry that springs up around popular media. Fan activities are literally creating economic and cultural activity connected to the show.
So the audience isn't just consuming the show, they're actively creating their own experiences and even businesses around it.
Precisely. And it's a global thing, too, not just local, thanks largely to social media like TikTok, Instagram. You see millions of views on hashtag Peaky Blinders, cosplay videos, fan edits, discussions happening worldwide.
And Jenkins talks about textual poaching.
Yeah, that's his term for how fans take elements they like from the original text, characters, settings, relationships, and use them to create their own stuff. Fan art, fan fiction, fan videos, memes.
They make it their own.
Exactly. They become what are sometimes called prosumers. They're both consumers and producers of media content, often operating outside the official control of the show's creators. It's a really active, participatory culture.
Okay, so wrapping up this whole deep dive into Peaky Blinders Episode 1, viewed through this powerful lens of media studies, what are the big takeaways for you? What should people remember?
Well, I think we've seen how the show isn't just, a story. It's a really carefully constructed media text. It cleverly uses hybrid genres, specific visual codes, and distinctive audio language to create its unique tone and meaning.
Right, the style is crucial.
And it offers these complex representations that deliberately challenge typical historical views, especially when it comes to class, local identity, and gender. It's doing something quite pointed there.
And we saw how the modern media industry, from those initial co-productions and funding bodies right through to global streaming giants like Netflix, played a crucial role in actually getting it made and enabling it to achieve that massive international reach.
Absolutely. The industry context is key. And finally, how all of that connects with audiences, how people find diverse pleasures in the show, how they actively decode its meanings in different ways, dominant, negotiated, oppositional,
Yeah.
and how they engage with it so creatively and passionately through fandom, which extends far beyond just sitting and watching. It becomes part of their identity, their community.
It really feels like analyzing media through these concepts, language, representation, industry, audience, gives you such a richer understanding, not just of the show itself, but of the historical context it depicts, the industry that created it, and maybe even how we as audiences actively interact with and even shape the culture around it.
Definitely. Which maybe leaves us with a final thought, perhaps a bit provocative. Given how effectively Peaky Blinders uses all this media language and representation to mythologize a criminal past, almost turning thugs like Tommy Shelby into these compelling, charismatic folk heroes,
Yeah.
how does that influence our collective understanding of history and identity today? What happens when the lines blur between historical reality and stylish fiction? And what does that tell us about the real power of media to shape not just entertainment, but perception itself?
Hmm. That's definitely something to chew on. A lot to think about there.